you ever had a dream that seems impossible to achieve? A dream so big and so far away from your current reality that you wouldn't even imagine speaking it? Well, this was the case with Tererai Trent. She grew up in a time of unspeakable poverty in sub-Saharan Africa, when young girls were forced to marry at 14 years old and have babies and remain illiterate. Her unspeakable dream was to gain an education to break this cycle of poverty in her family and in her village. And today, Dr. Tererai Trent is one of the most recognized voices for quality education and women's empowerment. She has changed the lives of generations of girls and women forever. I am honored.
Thank you for having me. Thank you.
I have chills just in saying all that I just said. You have done so much, so much. You just came from Zimbabwe, right here to be on our show.
Yeah, I arrived yesterday. But you know, while I recognized all the work that I have done, but I stand on the shoulders of many, many individuals.
Yes.
I couldn't have done what I am doing without the many angels that are out there that have looked into my eyes, saw something that I never saw, and believed in my dreams.
Isn't that beautiful?
Yeah.
Yes, and we all need that. We cannot do this alone, anything we're doing. Take me back to when you were growing up in Zimbabwe. What was your life like?
You know, it's interesting because I always talk about coming from this long line of generations of women who had been married very young before they could define their own dreams. I was born in a country that was known as Rhodesia. And today we are known as Zimbabwe, and we were the last country to gain our independence. So I grew up during the war that liberated my country. And what I remember most is in the evening, I would sit with my grandmother, my mother, and other women around an open fire and listen to these great stories, heroic stories of women surviving in a war-torn country, but women who, despite the fact that they were illiterate, but they were the sheroes and the heroes of the community.
They had to have endured so much.
Yes.
And to that circle of sisterhood, it's unbreakable.
It is, because collectively, when we come together and we believe in a vision, we can heal the world. I talk about women, we are the matriarchs, we are the healers, we are the wisdom whisperers, the ones who keep the community memory.
I read your book and I was reading about these women's circles, and I felt like I was a part of it. And the stories that your grandmother would tell, and your mother would tell, and it was real, though. It was real about how you had to cope with this situation you were in some way.
Yeah.
Was this a way to help you cope?
Yes, in many ways, because I grew up with both my grandmother and my mother. They would always say, it's not your past that's going to define who you are, but it is the dream and the vision and the expectations of yourself that's going to create that destiny. You know, I talk about when I was 18 years of age, I was already a mother of 4. And one of the babies died as an infant because I failed to produce enough milk. I was a child myself. I was just following the same pathway that generations of women before me had traveled. My great-grandmother was married off when she was very young, before she could define her own dreams. My grandmother went through the same, and my mother. And I knew that I needed to change my life. I always visualize my great-grandmother when she was born. Because all these women that I'm talking about, we were all exchanged for a cow because it's part of the, what they call the culture. And my grandmother would always say, no, it's not the culture, it's a custom.
There's a difference.
There's a difference. Culture is all loving, it's all embracing.
Right.
But a custom, like the way in America you build a custom-made house, someone has to sit and say, this is how I want to design my house. Someone had to sit and say, this is how we can have women, we can marry young, we can do all these things, because that's custom. Culture is beautiful.
Help me understand the custom, if you could.
Yeah.
I would like to understand, what is the custom that women need to marry young? What was the situation with the exchange and the poverty? Explain this to me.
Because we grew up, I grew up during the war. We were pretty much oppressed and marginalized by the colonial system that was in place, removed from fertile lands into agricultural lands that were not even fertile. And there was a lot of poverty that was shaped by that. And as a mechanism to survive, the men would find employment in factories and mines, and the women would remain home taking care of kids. So there was a disparity that was being shaped, because men would then get education because they are the breadwinners, they would bring income. And girls, what do? You are there to be married. And a lot of girls were being married very young before they could even get an education. That was the era where I was growing. And so when I talk about my grandmother, my great-grandmother, she was also married young. And I always visualize my great-grandmother when she was born. She was born into this relay. And I call that the relay of poverty. And she's running, holding this baton. And I carry that baton wherever I go. She has this baton, and she runs so fast with this baton. This is the baton of early marriage, the baton of illiteracy, the baton of a colonial system that never valued her. She ran so fast with this baton, my great-grandmother. She hands it over to my mother, to my grandmother. My grandmother grabs that baton of illiteracy, poverty, early marriage. She runs with that baton. She hands it over to my mother. My mother grabs that baton, the baton of illiteracy. She runs with that baton. She hands it over to me. And I said, it's not my race, it's not my baton. I need to shift and redefine this baton so I don't have to pass it on to my girls.
Yes. What made you say that?
Because my mother and my grandmother, they would always say, Tererai, we now have gained independence. You have more choices. You don't have to pass on this ugly baton to your girls. It's not your past that's defining who you are. And so I took that as a moral responsibility.
Yes, yes.
Because my grandmother would always tell the story of great hunger.
Yes, the great hunger versus the small hunger, yes.
There are two kinds of hungers in our lives. There is the little hunger. The little hunger is all about immediate gratification. I want that. I want it now. But the great hunger, which is the greatest of all hungers in our lives, it's hunger for meaning in our life. So I knew I needed meaning in my life. Despite the fact that I had been married when I was young, I had all these babies, and now we are in an independent country. I needed to change so we don't continue to pass the ugly baton to the next generation.